Dit is de Innovate-podcast. En dit is de eerste editie van 2021. Woehoe! Nog de allerbeste wensen voor jullie. Innovate is een netwerk van professionals in en om de kerk met hart voor de volgende generaties. Mijn naam is Martine Versteeg, relatiemanager kerk en jeugd bij Missie Nederland. In de Innovate-podcast nodigen we diverse experts uit het MissieNederland-netwerk om in gesprek te gaan over jeugdwerkthema's. En vandaag heb ik een bijzondere gast, Colin Piper. Colin is hoofd van de Youth Commission van de Wereld Evangelische Alliantie. En dat is zeg maar de grote zus van Missie Nederland. Missie Nederland vertegenwoordigt de Evangelische Alliantie in Nederland. En wij zijn aangesloten bij de Wereld Evangelische Alliantie. Maar goed, Colin heeft meer dan 35 jaar ervaring in het christelijk jeugdwerk. Of wat in het Engels trouwens veel hipper klinkt, youth ministry. En hij werkt in 70 verschillende landen wereldwijd aan het versterken van nationaal en internationaal youth ministry. Nou, ik ga met hem dus in gesprek over hoe we als jeugdwerkprofessionals 2021 goed kunnen starten. Zeker in deze tijden van corona. En we gaan het dus ook hebben over hoe kan je nou goed zorgen voor je eigen ziel. We gaan het hebben over soul care. All right. Colin, I'm so happy to have you on the Innovate-podcast. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah. How did you celebrate New Year this year?
I wish I had a great story to tell, and this is going to be so embarrassing, but I went to bed. And
Really?
Melissa woke me at midnight and said it's midnight. I grunted and went straight back to sleep again. So how
Really?
about that for a party
Oh,
pooper?
oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I must say that here in the Netherlands, we didn't have a very interesting New Year either. We were actually, I've told you this, but we are in lockdown, and we actually heard today that the lockdown is gonna be 3 weeks longer now. So we're all at home, homeschooling and everything.
Oh. Well, in Scotland, we are party central for New Year's celebration. It's called Hogmanay up here, and Scots traditionally party so hard. We don't have one day off, but
Really?
2 days off, January the 1st and January the 2nd, to recover. That is
Oh,
how
goodness.
much Scots party on New Year's Eve. But there is no partying. We're also in lockdown. We're also homeschooling, and it's tough.
Yeah, it is tough, isn't it? So I actually asked you to come on the Innovate podcast to talk about soul care, about how can
Yeah,
we start 2021 well. So I'm very glad that you want to
yeah.
talk to us about this. And I think, well, it's a big question to tackle in a podcast, but I think a good question to start with is, um, what do you actually mean with the whole phrase of soul care? It sounds, by the way, way much better in English than it is in Dutch. Zielzorg.
Really? I mean, I
Yeah.
can't even do that with my mouth. I don't know quite what that
Zielzorg. Yeah. Well, anyway, but what do you mean? I mean, what is soul care?
Well, do you know, we've been having this discussion because globally we realize this is such an essential topic across the whole globe. In Asia, where the work ethic is such, people are just working, 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 working in persecuted contexts where people are struggling and suffering so much, and in places of poverty, and in a lot of Western contexts where right now, actually across the globe, folks are struggling, particularly in youth ministry, actually with real depression and all sorts of questioning and lethargy, and it's a huge problem. The reason we use the term soul care as opposed to personal care is that personal care almost sounds like self-help. You know, I'm going to sort my life out. Soul
Mm.
care brings God into the equation and says, is us with open hearts saying, Father, speak into my soul. It picks up on what some of those Psalms talk about, you know, as a deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you, O Lord. There's this deep longing after God and to find the depth. There's deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfall. There's another Psalm for you. And
Mm.
there's that desire for depth. So I guess what we mean by it is to find a resource which is beyond ourselves but feeds the very depths of our soul, and so
Mm.
speaks into the most inner parts of our being. And all that sounds very, very, very new agey and odd,
Mm.
but actually, it's a thoroughly, thoroughly biblical, timeless um, thing. That's what we do. So soul care is all about feeding our souls on the Lord and letting Him
Mm.
nurture us, revive us, bring us all the promises in Christ, all the hope, all the joy, all the faith, all the love, all those things, finding a resource pool to feed on, which then equips us to do whatever we've got to do.
Lovely. But what is then the in that sense the why? Why is soul care so important?
Oh, gosh. Well, again, we could talk for the rest of this podcast on this. So let me be brief, but 3 reasons why it's important. First of all, it's important for us. Um, I've been in youth ministry for 37 years, 36, 37 years. I mean, I started very young, you need to know. And I think, particularly my younger days, I was so passionate about doing. I thought, do. Let's use every minute. Do. I think the older I've got, there are many, many, many things I would change about how I started in youth ministry. But one of the things I would seriously be wanting to do is to do less and be more.
Mm.
And the reason for that is very simple. I mean, in English we say we're human beings, not human doings, if you like. I don't know whether that translates into Dutch, but it's who we are is really important. In other words, who we are will impact what we do, but it doesn't work the other way round. So simply. In other words, what we do doesn't impact who we are, but who we are really has a huge impact. So I would, for my own benefit, want to invest far more in who
Mm.
I am, finding my identity in Christ and thriving in that identity. Secondly, though, it's actually intrinsic. It's actually central to our youth ministry. We talk a lot about discipleship, and rightly so, because sadly, when I look at the Facebook statuses of many of the young people I've worked with over the last decades, I see such a weakness of faith. It's really disheartening, if I'm honest with you. And I realize that our discipleship, not just mine, but subsequently the church's discipleship of these young people, has somehow failed. And there
Mm.
could be all sorts of reasons for that. But I actually think the best disciple making program is not a program, it's a person. Discipleship is caught, not taught, we say in English.
Mm.
So the way we actually disciple young people best is have youth leaders who are just the best disciples. And so for other people's sake, it's important. And thirdly, for the Lord's sake, I work with the World Evangelical Alliance, which means I get all these reports come across my, I'm going to say across my desk, actually, they just flash up on my screen, of course. One this morning was another report of a senior Christian leader who's failed, he's fallen, and we have to deal with this again. And it dishonors the Lord so much. And it's very sobering because I stop and I ask myself, I'm a flawed human being. What is to stop me dishonoring the name of the Lord? And in fact, I called some friends and I said, guys, we have got to ensure that we all finish well. We
Mm.
cannot dishonor the name of the Lord. And we do that by feeding our soul. So there's 3 reasons: for our benefit, for the young people we serve, and mostly, actually, I would say, for the name of the Lord. It is vital
Mm.
that we feed our souls and we feed on the Lord deeply.
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting thing, isn't it? On the sense of that we see churches on how do we disciple young people and the sense of um, uh, uh, living it out and showing on
Mm,
how we can be disciples of Christ and starting with that in that whole idea of soul care. What I thought was very interesting, I told you this before we started recording, is because care has something to do with health, being a healthy disciple of Jesus, I think,
mm,
if we
yes.
can call it that. And what I thought it was very interesting is that the World Health Organization changed their definition of health a few years ago, I think in
Mm,
2015. And the definition was that health is a state of physical, emotional, and social well-being. But a doctor, Martel Hubert, actually changed that and said, no, the definition of health is the ability to adapt and take control in the light of physical, emotional, and social challenges in life. And I think what that is, so that makes a very interesting shift. And I just asked you on why is soul care important. I think maybe with this whole idea of what health is maybe interesting to ask, like, why is it important right now in these times?
Yes, well, do you know, yeah, I hadn't heard that, and it's intrigued me. It's been playing on my mind actually since we had that little conversation, because I think that's such a good definition. That we tend to think that peace of mind is about, everything being fine. It's about a holiday. It's about a beach. It's about sort of walking through a field with the, sort of barefoot and plucking flowers and singing pretty songs, and all that is true, and I love doing all that, by the way. But it's more than that, isn't it? It's Jesus slept on a boat in a storm. Paul said, "I can face all situations through Christ who strengthens me." There's there's um, there's something resilient about that peace which isn't dependent upon circumstances. A year ago, I was in one of the most traumatic places I've ever been. It was a detention center of refugees in Bangkok, Thailand. And I was visiting a young man there who was literally living in a room with 120 other men. And they had just a tiny room, and they had this little space of floor. And he was allowed out for an hour a day to walk around. It was just so hideous. And I came out of that so humble, because how would I cope? How would my faith cope? How would we use this phrase mental health cope? We talk a lot about that these days, and to find a resilience of peace that can face even a situation like that with no hope in sight, no end goal, no end game, if you like. I realized again that is true peace. That is true faith. That is, and I had to ask myself: would that be
Mm,
my experience in that context? So it's not contextual. It's Christ focused. Our peace and our resilience.
mm. Yeah. So, but in that sense, because we talked about why, and maybe especially during crisis,
Mm,
like we have right
yeah,
now,
yeah,
also within COVID,
mm,
it is the question in that sense that is
yeah.
how do we do that within
Yes.
the crisis that we have?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, believe me, I understand, because here we are. We're not able to do what we are called to do, and for some of us, this is a really key thing. For some of us, it's what we're paid to do. And so there's all sorts of questions about the frustrations of our context, our fears of whether folks are going to be able to or willing to continue to employ us. We've got fears about whether we've got a youth ministry left. We don't know how to do it. We're feeling frustrated. We're feeling futile. We're bored. It all seems so hopeless. So we're helpless. And believe me, there are some now who are tuning off because they've had enough of what I'm saying. So yes, I mean the challenges are immense, aren't they? And
Mm,
yet, in the midst of all that, we have this remarkable opportunity too, because here we have just like a circuit break. We have a unique season, which perhaps will never come again. And actually, I pray it won't come
oh,
again.
please.
But we have this. We thought we said that about the last lockdown, of course. But anyway,
Yeah.
we have this unique season, and the question is, how can I use that season to find that depth of resilience, to feed my soul in such a way that my peace, my joy, my hope is not contingent, we say in English. It's not dependent upon the context in which I'm living. In other words, whatever comes my way, it stands strong. It's not knocked over. And the reason it's possible is that, and I realize all our situations are different. Some are sort of cooped up or living in very close proximity with others and getting on each other's nerves. Some are having to homeschool and do the work and keep life together and look after whoever. And then others, a bit like myself, actually are living in a beautiful place with a wife they love a lot and no one else. It's all fine. But anyway, forgive me. But that's our context. Actually, even all of us actually have a chance to create something of our own rhythm of life. And rhythms, I think, are really important. Jesus carved out time to get up early and to carve out time alone. And when he didn't have that time naturally, he would find it. He would go out of his way to find it by walking off into a different context, or by, as I say, getting up early, or something like that. We all have that possibility of determining something of a new rhythm that we might not have had any other way, and to maximize that time. And I don't mean, again, moving from one work ethic, which is, do this, do this, do this, into another work ethic where we're disciplining ourselves to almost torturously live a life which isn't natural, but
Mm,
actually to find a rhythm which is sustainable and obtainable, which enables us to enjoy the Lord, to take time to reflect,
mm,
to meditate on the Word of God, memorize it, and to pray into it, to worship, to stop and look back on the past, to dream about the future, to think again about what life could look like from here, to talk to the Lord about those hopes and dreams, to remember with the Lord the past, and then bring both the past and the future into the present, life in 3D, and to discipline ourselves that that's where my mind's going to go, not onto these other things, but I'm bringing these things before the Lord. So there are
mm,
all sorts of ways, and it's different for everybody. I'm not going to set out a formula, but actually, if we're intentional about working this out, we can find a rhythm which works for us, which is so positive and feeds us. And it is a unique season, which we might, as say again, we might never get again. And we need to see the positive and say, I'm going to take that season. I've got these things to do. I've got these kids to educate. I've got these people to cope with. But actually, I've also got time now, fresh
mm,
time, and I'm going to use it.
mm. Yeah, that's beautiful. And I do also think is I can imagine it also has to do with the seasons of your life. I
Yeah,
can imagine that it probably in your season
yeah,
with all this space in the beautiful Highlands of Scotland,
yeah. Here I am. Yeah.
that that how uh, your moments of soul care are probably different than
Yeah,
than I have
yeah,
at this moment. Um, but I think that is what I thought was very interesting about what Hubert said about health.
yes,
Uh, is it's not about how much you can do or the state that you're in, but that within the context that you are in, um, it is searching for uh, what fits
yeah,
your um, uh, your context, your
yeah,
possibilities,
yeah,
and searching Christ in that.
yes,
Uh,
yes.
that is soul care.
Yeah, I mean, his context is obviously secular, but rightly so, and that means that puts the burden on us to do all the looking, all the searching, and all the finding, actually.
Mm,
Whereas
that's
what we believe is something far more dynamic, beautiful, and empowering than that. That be
mm,
still and know that He is Lord is just a beautiful phrase, isn't it? And but it is still a discipline. But our discipline is to be still. It's a bit like the whole essence of what we believe, that we have faith, but we have faith in what God has done and what God will do. As is not passive, but it is it is the gateway, if you like, through which God comes, and that
mm,
sense of stillness, giving God space to speak into our lives, to feed our soul, is the key here. And it's not just about us trying to work this out, but actually letting God be God in our lives. And that's what's difference between personal care, which is our self-improvement, if you like, and soul care, which is God improvement and God at work in us, the hope of
Mm.
glory.
So that is truly a good beginning of 2021
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, once you get into a habit, the challenge then will be once we are freed from lockdown, whatever that looks like in each of our contexts. One of my fears is that we will just go back to normal, and we won't have learned any lessons through this. And I see it, and I hear it actually from Christians as much as non-Christians. When will this end? When can we get back to life as it was? Well, actually, let's not go back to life as it was. Let's find a new rhythm. Let's find new sense of a new perspective, even new priorities that takes us forward. We're not going back, we're going to go forward. And
Mm,
what if, I think as a church, we're going to have all sorts of challenges ahead. I don't know what it's going to look like, but actually, I'm not necessarily negative about this. I think actually, if we are looking ahead, then we can find ways to serve people who will be craving community contact and hopefully in the church finding community, finding purpose and identity that they've never known before. But as a church, we need to look forward to that. We need to anticipate that, and we need
mm,
to be stepping into that. And this is a great stop, reflect, and move on time, I think, for us to do just that. Youth ministry in particular, I think young people are going to, I pray, emerge from this, not looking back, but looking forward. And there will be challenges. I think we will lose youth groups actually. But I think actually for those of us that had taken time to reflect and have eyes to see, God will open up new doors and new
mm,
possibilities, which will reach more young people in new ways and greater depth than we've known
mm.
previously. Yeah,
Yeah, and I can and what I love what you're saying is actually that soul care is almost like the soil where this can
yeah,
grow.
absolutely. Mm.
And but I do think that maybe I didn't tell you I'm going to ask you this question, so I don't know if you have an answer on this, but well, uh, if we start about taking care of our souls, it's another question on the sense on how can we multiply that within young people. And I do hear you saying something about um, being a mirror for
Mm,
young
mm,
people, I think.
mm, mm. Absolutely. I mean, I've had so many calls today. It's been a crazy day today. But one of them was with a guy like myself who's been in youth ministry a while, and we're waiting for others to come on the call. So we were comparing notes. What would we do differently? Both of us said the same, actually, that we would be less interested in numbers and more interested in depth, more interested in what we invest from ourselves in those young people. And I think that is the key. We cannot create what we aren't. And so, unless we are disciples, knowing the fullness of Christ in our lives, how on earth do we expect to see that happen in the lives of those around about us? But the reverse is also true. There's something wonderfully attractive about Christ in us. It is the hope of glory, and those with eyes to see will see it. And so, what I think I would say in answer to that is, how do we reproduce it? Well, first of all, yes, we've got to know it, and then secondly, we need to be we need to be committed to reproducing it, not in a huge group, but actually in individuals. And that actually, for some, could involve a whole change of methodology of ministry, whether that's allowed, because I know so many of us are employed or at least appointed to work in a similar way, in a well-founded traditional way for various reasons, whether they're successful or not. But actually, where we can, even within those constrictions, constraints, and whatever, to focus on seeing Christ reproduced, be imitators of me as I'm an imitator of Christ, Paul said. And if that becomes the foundation of our ministry going forward, instead of producing whatever it may be, programs or whatever, then I think we will see that reproduced. And I mean, there's all sorts of dangers wrapped up in that it implies an intimacy, which again needs a careful control and an honest eye to stay pure and to stay holy and to stay Christ focused. But if we can get that right, the depth and the beauty of what we
Mm,
pass on to others' lives, and this is the key point, Martina, actually, that I know you probably, I'm sure you feel the same. The more I've been involved in youth ministry, the greater the privilege I think it's been. I was trained as a lawyer, but I'm so grateful to the Lord He called me into youth ministry.
mm,
And I see the legacy of my life is written in the lives of the young people I've influenced, who are now parents, grandparents, actually, believe it or not. But actually, I see that. And that is just such a huge, huge privilege. There's no better way of spending a life than inspiring a young life to live a
mm.
full life for Christ and change the world. That is it. And
That's what we do.
that's
That's
it.
what
Yeah,
we're called to as
yeah,
youth ministers.
yeah.
I do think that the challenges is in the sense of the one challenge on how do we do it ourselves. Um, you said like the also the challenges in how you can do that well with young people, but on the other, how do you set the stage for yourself?
Mm.
Is that also how do you do that with yourself? Is that a question you would
Yeah.
dare to answer?
It is a question, actually, a question I'd love to answer. Actually, this week I've got a lot of. I have a rhythm, I get up and it's time with the Lord, and then I do most of my thinking in the morning because that's when my brain works best. In the afternoon, I have a lot of calls like this, and every afternoon is calls on the hour all the way through the afternoon for me at the moment. But I mix them up a bit, and two of them are really special calls. One is with a man who's just turned 70, and one another is a man who's just turned 80. And I've asked both of them to say, what would you, I'm 58, okay, so what would you have wanted someone to have told you when you turned 58?
Mm,
And how do you recommend I live my seventh decade or even my eighth decade well? And
mm,
I am seeking advice from people. And that's all I'm saying, that if you're in your 20s, find someone in their 30s and ask them as many questions as you can. What do you wish someone told you when you were in your 20s? If you're in the 30s, someone in your 40s, 40s, 50s, 50s, 60s, so on. And let's be utterly intentional. Let's get as much input from as many people as possible. Let's overcome pride and arrogance and in all humility just seek to learn,
mm,
because I wish I one of my biggest regrets is not being more open to learn when I was younger, thinking I knew it when actually
mm.
I I knew some but not a lot.
Oh, but that is great advice
Yeah,
also for the coming year, isn't it?
thank you.
Especially in times
Hmm.
like this,
Hmm. Oh,
is
yeah,
seeking advice.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm 58 and I'm learning how to live life,
Mm,
and I'm intentional this year of getting people to teach me how to live life well. I want to find the people I love and respect the most, and I want to learn how they do it and how
mm.
they are who they are, and that's my advice to anyone and everyone.
Yeah. So we need to wrap it up.
Mm.
I love to say that. Let's wrap it up. But maybe is there something if you looking back in everything we've talked about, are there some things that you say like, oh, but we do need to talk about this before we wrap it up?
Actually, yeah, okay. You, now you put me on the spot, and I haven't thought about it. But let me say this. Something else I regret in my earnest years of evangelicalism was that I thought it would be wrong to have any other passions other than anything but the Lord. That everything else is fleshly, worldly, or whatever. And I'm sure not many are quite as bizarre as me in that regard. But actually, what I've discovered is the reverse is the truth. And the older I've got, and dare I say it, the closer to the Lord I've got, the more passionate I've got about everything. I love the countryside in which I'm living. I love the wildlife I'm surrounded by. I love my sport, but I love
Rugby, right?
rugby. I'm passionate
Yeah.
about my rugby. Yes, you're absolutely right. I love. I just love the arts. I love stuff I know nothing about. I just, if one of my friends is a top ballerina, I want to know about ballet. I just want to know everything. I just love meeting passionate people, and I love having that depth, because God has made us with those passions, with those skills, with those interests. And I found out, rather than distracting me from the Lord, they actually bring out God in full technicolor, because I discover him in all these things. I discover that he's the master of the arts. He's the master of creation. He's the master of everything.
Of rugby.
Rugby. And no, don't get me started on that, because I actually wrote a blog once on why the rugby clubhouse is more of a church than most churches. But we
Oh,
won't
really?
go there, because you can find God in all these things. Yes.
Okay,
Get out there, just increase your interest. Be interesting, because you're interested is what I would say.
Oh, thank you so much, Colin, for your enthusiasm, and it's really inspiring. Thank you so much.
Bless you. It's lovely to be with you.
Ik hoop dat jullie genoten hebben van deze podcast met Colin. Ik in ieder geval wel. En ik wil je bij deze uitdagen om eens even een moment te nemen om na te denken hoe jij in de stormen die we nu ervaren ruimte kunt maken voor soulcare. Wat heb jij nodig in 2021 om goed te starten? En wat heb je nodig om goed voor je ziel te zorgen? Is dat ruimte nemen voor stille tijd? Is dat het vinden van een mentor? Is dat een goed gesprek met iemand die je vertrouwt? Neem daar stappen in. Laten we dit jaar nog meer dan andere jaren voor de diepte gaan. In onze relatie met God, in de relatie met andere jeugdleiders en met kinderen, tieners en jongeren waar we mee te maken hebben in ons werk en leven. Dat we werkelijk vanuit ons leven Jezus mogen weerspiegelen. Goed, op onze site www.MissieNederland.nl/Innovate-podcast, en je weet het, Innovate is INNOV en dan een 8, vind je links naar materialen en tips vanuit het Missie Nederland-netwerk rond het thema soulcare. Wat trouwens leuk is om ook nog even met jullie te delen, is dat we komende maand met een aantal deelnemers van Missie Nederland een gesprek zullen voeren rond soulcare. Dit is, zoals Colin ook zei, het is zo'n wezenlijk punt in jeugdwerk. Niet alleen voor de jongeren waar we mee te maken hebben, maar ook voor jezelf. En we hebben gewoon echt werkers nodig die erin zitten voor de lange termijn. En dan kunnen we gewoon niet zonder goed zorgen voor onze ziel. We zullen daar dan ook gaan nadenken over hoe we die beweging van soulcare verder zullen kunnen stimuleren in Nederland. Maar goed, daar zul je vanzelf wel wat over horen. Vind je nou de Innovate-podcast waardevol? Laat het me vooral weten. Mail me martine@missienederland.nl. Maar geef ook de podcast een ranking, zodat het beter gevonden wordt. En ik vind het echt altijd heel fijn om van mensen te horen wat goed werkt, wat niet goed werkt, wat thema's zijn die jullie belangrijk vinden. Dus laat het me vooral weten. Tot de volgende podcast.